So hi everybody, we are here again on Friday now. We're I guess at the end of week 2 of social distancing, and this is the second video of our planning series on estate planning. And next week we're going to get into some business and personal planning as well, some financial planning. This is something that, as long as we're all like locked down or not going out, not doing all the things that we usually would do, not being in the office, why don't we take a time to plan so that when we are get busy again, these are the things that we usually put off. We usually put off making estate planning decisions. We usually put off making those decisions about our finances and our business and long-term and strategic ideas. If you've got the time, if you've got the resources, let's do it now. It's a good opportunity. It's a good opportunity to do it. Take the information that you received on Tuesday. If you saw Tuesday's video was about probate and non-probate assets, our different types of estates. Go back and look at that. We're going to reference that today in today's video on trusts and planning and how trusts work in planning. Take that time. Do your research. Contact an advisor. If you don't have an advisor, contact me. We can do it via direct message. I'm taking appointments right now in my private practice over video conference. It's worked out really, really well. Some of us have had a really good time on the video conferences that we've done. Call us at High Swartz, 610-275-0700. Get to one of our attorneys. We'll get you to one of the experts in this area. If you have a question about a discipline that's not necessarily legal, we'll get you to a good advisor. So really appreciate you tying in today. Again, Don Petrilli here, and today's topic is about trusts. So who do you trust? How is a trust used? Aren't trusts only for those rich people who have trust fund babies that we need to make sure that they have enough money to travel the world? That's not necessarily the case when you're looking at trusts right now, because trusts are used in all sorts of different ways. So the first thing that we want to talk about here is, what is a trust? What makes up a trust? I've heard about these things. I've heard about bank and trust. I've heard about, again, trust funds. I've heard about trustees governing something, but what the heck is a trust? Just really, really simply put, a trust is when somebody is responsible for an asset for somebody else. So that asset, that group of funds, that item, that piece of real estate, that business is placed in trust for another, and somebody's going to govern that. So, when is this used? I mean, this sounds like something, again, only very, very rich people may use, and that is not necessarily the case at all. So let's talk about what makes up a trust. And again, we're here talking about trusts in our planning series right now. We talked about what goes into a will and what goes outside of your will on Tuesday, and today we're talking about trusts, which are sometimes outside of a will, but yes, sometimes they can be inside of a will. So what makes up a trust? Well, first of all, you have a settlor. The settlor is the person who settles the trust, puts stuff into the trust, and usually it's their own assets. That settlor can also be done. It can be done via a will. So an executor might be taking assets from an estate that they're administering. Somebody passes away and they say, I want to leave assets in trust for a particular purpose. So what they'll then do is the executor will take the money and put it into trust. That's not technically a settlor. Settlors are usually thought of as people who are establishing a trust during their lifetime. There are other terms for this. Some of the terms that you use is grantor, people who granted the assets to the trust. Another term is sometimes used is a trustor. These are people who contributed to the trust. So that when you come from that, you come from the trustor, now you need a trustee. And the trustee is the person who is responsible for managing what the trustor put into the trust or what the settlor put into the trust. They have to follow specific rules. So what are those rules? Well, a trust needs a purpose. Why am I setting this aside? Why am I putting money in somebody else's hands? For what purpose is that? And what that generally leads to is Who's the beneficiary? Who is going to benefit from this money, from this asset, from this piece of real estate, from this business, whatever it is that I want to put in trust? Who's going to benefit from that? And often that benefit can be maybe the trustor's children, the settlor's children. Maybe it could be grandchildren. But there could also be a particular purpose for that trust. So one of the purposes that we see trusts being used for are in what are called testamentary trusts. Testamentary trust, if you recall, that was via a will. So we have an asset that's a probate asset. Again, go back to Tuesday's video when we talked about probate and non-probate assets. And we took that asset from the will by the executor and we put it into a trust that was managed by a trustee that was appointed in the will. So what that is now we have a trustee appointed in the will, property set aside. We'll often do that in a testamentary trust in order to, say, protect children. We don't always want our children getting their entire inheritance maybe when they're 18. Or maybe we want our children to have to follow certain rules in how they're going to get their inheritance. That can be done by using this testamentary trust concept, having somebody else manage it. So who is that somebody else who manages it? Who acts as a trustee? That can be somebody who you, wait for it, yeah, anybody going to guess the word? Yeah, trust. Somebody who you trust. And that can be a person. Sometimes it's an aunt or an uncle in terms of a trust set up for a minor under a will. Sometimes it's like that kind of person. Sometimes it's a financial institution. Sometimes you may need some sophisticated management, so you may hire a professional. But it's got to be somebody who's going to be around for the duration of the trust. So if we're talking about a minor's trust here, we're talking about something that's going to benefit your children or your grandchildren. You want somebody who is probably going to be around and capable of doing these management for the entire time until the trust is slated to end. So when the trust is slated to end, typically it's when you've fulfilled your trust purpose. So a lot of times minors' trusts, we're going to put this money aside and make sure that it's only going to be spent for education, health, maybe general maintenance expenses, but expenses that are clearly defined. We don't want our kids getting an entire inheritance and blowing it on a Ferrari. I mean, that's like, that's something that I can do as like, as a guy who's in middle age and going through a middle age crisis or something like that. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that our children, our grandchildren, when they get this money, are using it for the right purpose. So then a lot of times what we'll say is, okay, if we're using it for education and it hasn't been exhausted for all of the child's education, then we're going to dole it out over a period of time. We'll give it maybe at age 25, they can get half. Maybe at age 30, they get the remaining half. Those are all very, very, those are things that we can do and we can put in the trust document. So what we've talked about so far is we talked about the elements of a trust. Do we have a trustee? Do we have a settlor who donated property? Do we have a trust purpose? That trust purpose is usually written out in a document and all of the rules that the trustee has to follow. Do we have a beneficiary? Now, when the trust purpose goes away, typically the trust goes away and there'll be an event of final distribution. There are some other reasons that we'll use trust. We talk about the testamentary trust. Well, there's the other type is called a living trust. The Latin word, the law school word, well, that's inter vivos trusts. And again, we're talking here about trusts, how they relate to your estate plan. Are they something that the average person needs to consider when they're doing some planning? Is that something only for rich people? And we're quickly finding that some people of moderate assets who have a moderate estate might need to consider using trusts to protect their children, their grandchildren, their beneficiaries as they go on. In addition to those people who might be well off and have greater means, who may have some different purposes. So, talking about inter vivos trust. An inter vivos trust is a living trust. It's when you're alive, you act as the settlor, and you put your money into this trust. Often, in those cases, the settlor is the same person as the trustee. And sometimes they're the beneficiary as well. Well, why do people do that? Well, in some states, Pennsylvania not really being one of them, in some states, probate is a really, really tough process. It's a very, very expensive process. And some people, you hear that phrase again, we talked about it on Tuesday, avoid probate. Let's avoid probate. That is sometimes advisable. And in this case, that would avoid probate. But very, very, very importantly, it does not avoid estate administration. Because the trust will still need to be administered. The trustee will still have to report to the beneficiaries. There still may be inheritance tax. Remember on Tuesday, we talked about the difference between the taxable estate and the non-taxable estate. We had a lot of information that we threw out there on Tuesday in one big chunk out there. So again, we're talking about trusts here. I'm Don Petrilli. I'm an attorney at High Swartz. I'm the former Register of Wills of Bucks County. Encountered a lot of these things during my career, and we're trying to help people. We're trying to encourage people during this coronavirus, during the time that they are in their houses, during the time that they might have some extra time to review their situation, to do their planning for when this inevitably ends and life gets busy again and they put it off again. So we want to help them out. So we talked about the inter vivos trust. There are types of inter vivos trusts too. Sometimes you can do what's called a special needs trust. I have a disabled person. That disabled person is not going to be able to take care of themselves once I'm done taking care of them. I want my assets to go to that person. But they might be receiving public benefits. They might be receiving some type of additional care. So the special needs trust can be an instrument that we use in order to make sure that vulnerable person has financial means, and that my as the trustee or trustor, excuse me, as the person who's funding the trust, that those assets are applied in a particular fashion for that person's benefit. It can be a very, very special tool. Usually we see special needs trusts established during somebody's lifetime, but they don't have to be. They can be a testamentary trust. They can be the beneficiary of a will or established right within a will. There's lots of ways to do that. Again, you got to talk to a good professional when you're talking about these types of things. Another way that's very, very common is what's called Medicaid planning. Sometimes people will put some of their assets into a trust in order to qualify for Medicaid benefits down the road and have some of those trust assets not be attachable by the government and not counted as assets when they are looking at trying to qualify for Medicaid benefits. Again, that's a very, very specialized area of planning. It's one with a lot of pitfalls, a lot of mistakes. All I can say is that if that's something that you're interested in doing, make sure you talk to a professional who really knows those rules inside and out, because you could wind up making your life very, very complex and not receiving the benefit you think you're receiving or you think that your heirs should receive if you don't do that correctly. So really want to make sure that that you're doing that correctly. So we talked about testamentary trusts that are established in wills. We talked about inter vivos trusts. We talked about types of inter vivos trusts, which can be just your standard living trust. We talked about special needs trusts. We talked about Medicaid trusts. There are also the kinds of trusts that what you can use them in order to establish a legacy. If you are somebody who is of high net worth, and you want to make sure that your particular charitable cause is funded forever, you might be able to use the trust in order to, say, the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia. It's a great foundation with a lot of historic and valuable artwork that's been curated for hundreds of years. Well, the Barnes family established this trust for the purpose, we talked about that earlier, for the purpose of making sure that this art would be available for people to enjoy for centuries. And they've been able to fulfill that trust purpose for years. So these are the questions that you really need to think about if you're going to consider using trusts as part of your estate planning, either in your will, testamentary, or outside of your will, inter vivos or living trust. So those are, again, two ways of using a trust. Seems like in estate planning, we always have two options: probate, non-probate, taxable, non-taxable, testamentary, inter vivos. We have all of those different types of ways of trust. And again, for those of you who are just joining us, I'm Don Petrilli, and I am an attorney with the law firm of High Swartz. Give us a call at 610-275-0700. You can email me, dpetrilli@highswartz.com. No CH in there, SWARTZ.com. We're happy to answer any of these questions on these things. And I'm looking down at my notes so I don't forget anything here. So some of the hints you got to think about: is there somebody I need to provide for? Is there somebody who I really don't trust with the money right now, either because they're an adult who's just going to blow it all, or somebody who's an adult that might have some debts that might be that their inheritance might be attached to, or somebody who is maybe a minor who needs special care, or is there somebody who is a vulnerable special needs person I want to take care of? So is there somebody? Is there a cause I want to fund for a long time? Is there somebody I need to protect for themselves? These are all reasons you might want to use a trust either in an inter vivos fashion or in a testamentary fashion. Lastly, pick a trustee that you not only trust, but that you know could be in a long-term relationship. If your kids are 6 or 7 and you want your trust to dole out money until they're 30, well, who's going to be around in 23 years to be able to manage that? Is it an aunt? Is it an uncle? Might not be a grandparent, realistically. We want to think about that. Is it an institution? Do we want an institution so my kids aren't necessarily at odds with the trustee at times when the kids naturally know that there's this money for them, and the trustee's saying, no, you got to wait till you're older, the rules are that you're older, now they're going to blame that trustee for not giving them out. Are they going to respect the financial institution a little bit more? Are they going to respect the professional a little bit more? These are all questions that you want to proceed, and a good professional is really going to help you walk your way through them. Also, make sure it's worth it. You know, we could be planning for these trustee things, and we could have a smaller inheritance, or we thought when we were planning that we had a large inheritance. We might have had a large amount of money set aside for retirement. And 20 years have gone by from planning, and all of a sudden we've really, really diminished our assets because we've been living. Nothing wrong with that. It's just a fact. Some of the times I joke with my clients, the best estate plan you can have is that the last check that you last check that you write bounces. Sometimes that's the best estate plan. But for most people, that's not the estate plan, and we want to make sure that we're planning properly. So I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I hope the information is useful. We're going to be doing another one of these. We're going to jump off of estate planning next week, and probably Monday it looks like we're going to do one. We're going to do one that's on the new CARES Act. And that's going to be, we're going to focus in on what are the small business provisions and what are the individual provisions that can really help our economy get back up and running in the next couple weeks. We really need to focus on that as a society. And again, we're doing this planning now, not because we're afraid, but because we know that tomorrow is going to come and these questions are still going to be around. So look forward to hearing from somebody. Leave me a DM. Leave me a comment. If you have any questions, call us 610-275-0700. And thank you very much, and hope to see you guys next week. Have a great day.